Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 midterm elections, and the title is not clickbait. We're going to be taking a look at how the state of Connecticut could flip to the Republicans in this fall's elections. Now, I'm not saying that Connecticut's Senate seat, for example, is up for grabs. I think that's going to stay in the Democratic hands quite comfortably. And for the House races as well, I really don't see a very many competitive districts. You know, you have some D+2, D+3 districts, but they always go to the Democrat by like 15 points for whatever reason. So they're really not competitive seats. But, you know, Connecticut being thought of as a relatively blue state on the federal level is a very safe assumption. But when it comes to statewide politics, as we're going to see, it's quite the opposite. It's a very competitive state when it comes to, the governorship and other statewide positions. Now, obviously, how well Republicans do in Connecticut is really going to be determinant on a few factors. Of course, one being how red of a wave is 2022, and we have conflicting data on that. While Republicans are leading in a lot of the generic ballots on the House, we also have, when you look at Biden's approval rating, for instance, his disapproval rating, when it's asked questions like, would you favor a Republican over Biden, it doesn't get as high of marks as Republicans would want. And that's because really a segment of people that are disapproving of Biden are, left-wing voters that aren't going to vote Republican, but just aren't a fan of Biden. So we really have a tough time gauging how red of a year this year is going to be in the fall. You know, I think Republicans are going to take back the House. I think that's a near certainty at this point, but it really depends on how much. And of course, the Senate looks well for them now, but again, that's still up in the air as well. Another factor in determining what kind of year we're going to see this year is the slate of candidates that Republicans are putting forward. And in some states, I think Republicans have, excellent candidates. And, there's some other states like Pennsylvania, for instance, and Arizona, where I think the Republicans could do better and, have more appealing candidates on the in the general election ballot. But overall, the tide is in favor of Republicans. We have an incumbent Democratic president whose approval rating at now is in the low 40s. So this certainly, all of these factors put together should certainly help any Republican in Connecticut. Now, back in 2020, Connecticut went to Biden by 20 percentage points, just about. So this was a state that was not even competitive. In fact, it got a lot bluer from its 2016 numbers, where it was a plus 14 Democratic state. Hillary Clinton won it by 14 points. We have Joe Biden winning it by 20. So, all the counties in Pennsylvania, Connecticut moved to the left. But in 2018, it was a very different story. In 2018, we saw Republican nominee Bob Stefanowski losing this race, but only by around 3 points. And this was despite the national environment being heavily against the Republicans. We saw a number of states where Republicans did very poorly. Of course, you had Illinois, where the Republican incumbent governor lost by a landslide. And just all across the country, the Republican nominee in Pennsylvania, was the incumbent governor of Wisconsin at the time, Governor Walker, losing re-election. So it was a very bad year for the GOP as a whole. However, for Bob Stefanowski, it was a pretty decent showing for a year that was so hostile to the Republican Party. Now, Ned Lamont won this race by 49.4% to 46.2%. This was off the back of Governor Dan Malloy, who was very, very unpopular. And as we'll see, his races, he barely eked out victories in those as well. But this goes to show you that even with Ned Lamont being a fresh slate, Bob Stefanowski did a good job of painting him as, the Dan Malloy 2.0. And it worked very well. And I think the national environment, of course, at the end of the day, probably made it so that Bob Stefanowski had a tougher time winning this race. I think, had it been just an even party year, Bob Stefanowski probably could have come out on top. He ran the sort of campaign you'd expect from a New England Republican, moderate to liberal on social issues, and, conservative on fiscal issues and crime and stuff like that, because those are the issues that suburban voters typically like. And Connecticut is a suburban state. I mean, it's basically a suburb of New York City in an odd way, similarly to Long Island in New Jersey, northern New Jersey anyway. Basically suburbs of New York State. The western part of Connecticut, a lot of people there work in New York City, go there very often. So it's a very suburban state. And, we saw places like Fairfield County, for instance, which is one of the most populous counties in Connecticut. Bob Stefanowski was able to get 45% in this county. This was a county that Donald Trump got 35% in. So he overperformed Trump very considerably, and he won Tolland County, Middlesex County. These were two counties that, of course, were blue in the 2020 election by almost safe margins in the case of Middlesex County. So Connecticut is a really odd state when it comes to statewide elections. 2014, which was actually a red wave year. Interestingly enough, we saw Fairfield County almost flip red. In fact, it was less than like 30 votes from flipping red, which is 20 votes even. Less than 20 votes from flipping to the Republican, which is astounding. But you had places like Hartford County, New Haven County kind of anchoring the state toward the Republicans. And again, you have these red counties, Windham County, which went red in 2020 and 2016, not go as red as it would need to for the state to actually flip. If we take a look at the 2010 gubernatorial election, this was an even closer race. This had Democratic nominee Dan Malloy only winning by around 7,000 votes, or 0.5%, half a percentage point over incumbent Tom Foley. So like when you look at the town breakdown of Connecticut, really it is the Hartford area, New Haven, Bridgeport. These are like the blue anchors that kind of hold the state solidly Democratic. Because when we look at for instance, when we look at the town breakdown for a state like Connecticut, you have places like Hartford, despite somebody like Bob Stefanowski doing well statewide, only getting 9% of the vote in Hartford, Bridgeport 18%, New Haven 13%. So while the rest of the towns and municipalities of Pennsylvania, I keep calling it Pennsylvania because it's got the relatively same shape, even though I know it's not. Connecticut, these are very light red towns, and really, they're not as solid. Like Connecticut doesn't really have any solid Republican areas like other states do. Doesn't have the same political geography, and really New England as a whole doesn't have the same political geography as, like a place like Ohio, where you have like the western portion of the state and the southeastern portion of the state very, very red. Connecticut, you don't really have that. You have two counties that tend to vote Republican, and the rest of the counties kind of leaning toward the Democrats. Now, we look at Connecticut's, partisan breakdown over time. It's had two Republican governors before Dan Malloy. So it's two Republican governors and now two Democratic governors. And both of these Republican governors won by landslides. If we go back just to 2006, Jody Rell won by she got 63% of the vote. She won every county in the state. In terms of municipalities, she basically only lost the most liberal municipalities, the cities and like college towns in the state. 2002, the same thing, a really good margin for the Republican, and 1998. So just all around, this was for the past three gubernatorial elections, Connecticut was going solidly red. And, normally Connecticut does have a Republican governor. This is kind of an exception, but as politics has become more nationalized, more people just start voting for the party they align with on every race, even though, states like Connecticut and the rest of New England have a long history of splitting tickets and voting for, Republicans on some races and voting for Democrats on the more federal races. So, we could see something like that happen this year in 2022. If we look at the polling as of right now, though, the polling is one of the things that is against Bob Stefanowski at the moment. We have only one poll. It's a Democratic-leaning poll, and it has Stefanowski at 36, Lamont at 52. Now, I very likely think that we're going to see a New Jersey situation where the polling in the beginning is not going to be good for Stefanowski, which is bad for him because that really does hurt fundraising. Jack Ciattarelli, the polling for him was not great up until around September, October. Once Biden really started to plummet on the national level, we saw, Ciattarelli's poll numbers do better. Same with Glenn Youngkin's in Virginia. The Democrats' poll numbers were going down. The Republicans were creeping their way up. And I think we're probably going to see that in a place like Connecticut. Now, for Biden's disapproval rating, I will say it's basically stayed steady at the mid to high 50s. I'm interested to see if, all this drama in Ukraine and Russia, I'm interested to see if that's going to hurt Biden's approval rating even more, because it is a very volatile situation. But as of right now, as of making this video, February 2022, Biden's approval rating is only like 41%, depending on what poll you look at. So, not strong numbers going into the midterms. Couple that with the fact that Connecticut tends to be close statewide anyway, and the fact that Bob Stefanowski is a recognizable name now. He ran for statewide office in 2018. He almost won. And I think he has a decent chance of winning again. Now, Ned Lamont's approval rating is relatively good right now. I will preface this by saying he had a very high approval rating during COVID, 70%, and it's kind of been tapering off slowly ever since then. So, we don't really have any latest numbers. We have numbers from the fall that had him at like 63%, although we had other polls that had him at like 54% approval. So it's really hard to actually determine where his approval rating is right now. We don't have any recent polls on it. But, even with an approval rating in the mid to low 50s, like we saw with Phil Murphy, this was the result. Phil Murphy winning his race by only 3 points. So I think either way, whether Republicans flip Connecticut or not, it's going to be a close race on the governor's level. Provided something, really bad doesn't happen to the Republicans until then. I think it's going to be a relatively competitive race. I think Ned Lamont's going to have to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time campaigning around the state of Connecticut, because it's not a shoo-in like other Democratic states. It's not California where Newsom is guaranteed re-election. It's a much more nuanced state. It's a much more purple state when it comes to the statewide offices. So anyway, guys, that's really it for today's video. Please like this video down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.